Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
This is the Nobel Prize week, and we are talking about some wonderful Nobel Prize winners, but even more than that, for their science that got them here. Because that science, in both these cases, I'm talking of chemistry as well as physiology and medicine, their science is of great importance and is of life-changing, generational life-changing significance. Now, I know that there is a lot of discussion in my responses on what really gets me excited. Some people say it's the Middle East. Some people say generally it is geostrategic affairs, Pakistan, Afghanistan, or the India-China situation, or anything like that. Some of you might even have noticed that whenever possible, I'm quite happy to indulge myself with sports whenever I get a chance. What is the essential truth there? The essential truth is that what drives me and you and most human beings who are living human beings, not those who are vegetating in their heads, not people who are intellectually lazy, and there are very few people like that, because what keeps you agile and alert is curiosity. You have to be curious. When people come to me, young journalists, or if I'm invited to come and speak at journalism schools, people say, what is the most important prerequisite for a journalist? I tell them curiosity. If you are curious, because to be curious, you first have to have the humility to know that you don't know everything. You are not sab janta wala. People know more than you. Our advantage as journalists is that we can reach out to people who know more than us in any field and to learn from them, because they open out to us. So that is what drives us, curiosity. So the reason I talk about science for the second successive day in a very busy, newsy week, in other terms, is because I'm so interested in what's going on, and this is the Nobel week. If we don't do it now, when will we do it? And some people might say that this is not TRP friendly. Do I care, or do you care? If you cared for TRP type stuff, you would not be watching this. You'd be watching one of those commando comedian channels which have been exposed today for fixing their TRPs, and we'll talk about that in the course of time that more facts come out. Now, these Nobel Prizes, one set is for physiology and medicine. The other set is for chemistry. Now, physiology and medicine we'll talk about in a bit more detail, because the implications of it are specific very strongly to India. The second one also because that marks a turning point in global scientific debate. It involves an instrument that marks a turning point in genomic science or biotechnology, but it also marks a change, not just a turning point, but I would say a game-changing point. It is a much misused expression, and I have actually banned it in my newsroom, but I will, that expression was invented for a situation like this, a game-changing difference it makes to the ongoing ethical debate on biotechnology. So first of all, what is it that I said might be or is a lot more relevant to India, or of a much greater significance to India? That is the Nobel shared equally between three scientists for physiology and medicine. So the first winner is Harvey Alter, who is the chief infectious diseases investigator at National Institute of Health in America. He did his initial work and a lot of his early work, which has led to today's Nobel, in the 70s at a big blood banking system in Bethesda, Maryland, on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Then there is Michael Houghton. Michael Houghton is the Li Ka-shing Virology Institute head in University of Alberta, I presume in Canada, and we'll tell you something about Li Ka-shing in the passing. And there is Charles Rice, who is a professor of virology at Rockefeller University, New York. So these three have been given the Nobel Prize together. Now, there are some fascinating things here. The Nobel Prize that's been given to them is for discovering hepatitis C virus. Now you might think, but we've always known about hepatitis C virus. I've seen advertisements, I've seen hospitals. If I have a blood transfusion, they check it for hepatitis C. So what's new? What's new about this discovery? So thereby lies a fascinating story, because this discovery was first made, again I told you, everything in life, if you have a creative mind, if you have a growing mind, you have to be curious. And science, particularly new science, discovery is all about curiosity. So it was in mid-70s when Dr. Alter worked in this blood banking system that he and his colleagues realized that a lot of people were coming back with chronic liver disease, and this was quite a destructive chronic liver disease. And they thought that they were checking their blood for hepatitis A and B. So why were these people still sick and showing all symptoms as if they had hepatitis? So they began working on it. And out of curiosity, as they experimented, they found that there was a third bug. There was a fresh bug, or there were more than 2 bugs that these people had, because if they took out samples from them and they injected chimpanzees with those samples of blood, then chimpanzees were getting infected. So they figured that this was another bug, and this bug was transmissible to other people. So that was the first step. The paper based on this was published, imagine, in 1978. I got my first full-time job in 1977. So that it goes that far back. When that happened, it's like a relay race. One runs the first leg with the baton, then the next one picks up the baton. So that baton was picked up by Michael Houghton. Michael Houghton, then he used to work at Chiron Corporation, or Chiron Corporation. I think Americans prefer to say Chiron Corporation. So he decided to apply an unorthodox molecular approach to clone the genome of this, whatever virus it looked like. It was actually initially called hepatitis non-AB, because they didn't know what it was. So he applied this unorthodox molecular approach to this, and he was able to clone this genome. After he cloned this genome, you knew that you had another virus, but there was one more mystery. So this one, Michael Houghton ran the second leg. It's a 3-leg race, not a 4-leg race like the traditional ones. And then the baton was picked up by Charles Rice. Charles Rice then had to resolve the final puzzle, which was, what is the genome what is it in the genome that makes this virus transmittable? So he worked on this, and he said this is what makes this virus transmittable. Now you knew that there was a new virus. It was available in the blood. So the first thing that was done is to start testing all blood for hepatitis C as well. In India, it started in 2001, and that is because since 2001, there has been very little hepatitis C fresh infection in India, because every blood bank in India follows this protocol now. They check their blood for, besides other things and other kinds of hepatitis, also for hepatitis C. So it was a breakthrough. Then once you know the bug and you know the genome and you know its weak point, which means what makes it transmissible, then you can start targeting the wretched fellow. And that's what started. And then scientists came up following this with a treatment. Now this treatment is a brilliant treatment. It's very expensive overseas. If you had this treatment in America, it will cost you $100,000 for 3 months. Now in 3 months, the treatment fully cures you. And I will go to an authority to talk more about this. But some good Indian people organized and campaigned to have this treatment brought to India at almost no cost. So I am now switching to a conversation that I had as I was preparing for this with Dr. S.K. Serene. Now Dr. S.K. Serene is among the world's foremost hepatologists, liver specialists. he saved the lives of two friends and colleagues of mine who had both been advised immediate liver transplants. How he did that, I hope you don't have to go and consult him, but he is a wonderful doctor with a lot of experience and a lot of commitment. He is today the director of the Delhi-based Institute of Liver and Biliary Studies, and he's also been heading Delhi government's COVID program. Now, he used to be at GB Pant Hospital, Govind Ballabh Pant Hospital, which is a super specialty government hospital in Delhi. In the 90s, when this stuff started coming out, so by 89, you knew that this was a new virus. Its name was hepatitis C. It was a virus with a name. So mid-90s, he and some other doctors began working to look at blood in Indian blood banks and to look at the protocols in Indian blood banks. And then after a lot of effort, you know, in India, it's very tough to bring about change. Blood banks were resisting it. Not more than a couple of dozen out of 1,000 plus were doing it. And then a woman got this infection, hepatitis C, and was able to prove that she got it from a blood transfusion. She went to Supreme Court, and then Supreme Court gave an order to the government. That between the government and the Supreme Court, then rules were made. So since then, every Indian blood bank checks out the blood for hepatitis C. But you know what? Until then, a lot of damage had been done. So today, India has anything between 45 to 55 lakh patients, or I won't say patients, I'll say hepatitis C positive people. I will also not say carriers, and I will tell you why. They are not carriers because hepatitis C is rarely transmitted from a human being to a human being unless there is an exchange of blood. So unlike hepatitis B, which can spread sexually quite freely and through through saliva and stuff, hepatitis C, it doesn't happen like that. In fact, less than 1% of all infections from hepatitis C are sexually transmitted. It is possible, but it is very rare. So 45 to 55 lakh people are walking around with this virus, and they don't have to, because if they stay on with it, if the virus stays in, at some point chances are that they will develop deadly liver damage. Once again, speaking with Dr. Sareen, he tells me that people who have it in their 20s or 30s, it may not show up for 30-40 years after that. It vegetates in your body for a long time. It may then hit you in your 60s and 70s, but people who might catch it in their 60s or 70s will have much less chance, because this virus will turn into a disease in their livers very soon, and it's a deadly disease. So what do you do about it? So the first thing you need to do, so Dr. Sareen told me that, look, if you can read out these 4 points, I mean, he requested me, but it's an order, and I think it's a good order for me to follow. So one, he said that in 2008, and he said the work on this was done by J.P. Nadda, the current BJP president, when he was health minister, and then the current health minister, Harsh Vardhan, with great enthusiasm took it forward. You must give the compliment where it's due. So in 2018, India launched this new program called National Viral Hepatitis Control Program. Under this program, he said, India has a unique situation whereby anybody can go and get himself or herself tested for free and then get the entire treatment for free. And the treatment that is $100,000 in America for 3 months is, one, Government of India is giving it free, and second, he and his colleagues were able to persuade Gilead, the global pharma multinational, to provide the drug very cheap in India. So in fact, even if you buy the drug, it's 1 tablet a day, no side effects. I will not give you the name because we don't want people going to chemist shops and asking for this, because this is India. But 1 tablet a day, no side effects, 3 months, and he said that the remarkable thing is that this disease disappears. Now this rarely happens with viral disease. He said with this disease, with that 1 tablet a day for 3 months, the success rate of total cure rate is upwards of 95%. Nothing is 100%. For people who have not developed chronic hepatitis as yet or liver damage as yet, even for people who might have developed it it's almost 90%. So God forbid, if you might be having something like this, you should have it sorted out. You don't deserve to carry it with you. So first of all, he says that anybody who's had blood transfusion before 2001 or surgery or any sizable surgical intervention, even like say root canal surgery before 2001, because then people were not so conscious of hepatitis C, should go and get themselves tested. There is no harm, there is no stigma to getting tested, and that's the reason he says a lot of people are not getting tested, although it became free and several lakh people have benefited from this program. Many others are not coming out of this fear of the stigma that if I am tested positive, it will be immediately presumed that I have been sexually promiscuous or I have been doing funny things. He said with hepatitis C, there is no such challenge. Less than 1%, in fact, only about 0.5% of Indian cases are sexually transmitted. Most of the others are either transmitted by blood transfusion or by unclean syringes. It's very common among intravenous drug users, unfortunately, and people like that. So, anybody who's had blood, surgery or any major invasive intervention before 2001, please have yourself checked out. Second, those who take blood transfusion multiple times, like say hemophiliacs. So while blood banks test the blood now, but still for abundant caution, it's best to have yourself checked out, because the cure is free and the cure is so certain and so free of side effects. Number 3, he says intravenous drug users, people who might be using drugs because they tend to share those syringes. Please, for heaven's sake, go and get yourselves checked out. Costs nothing, takes no time. And finally, anybody who has a history of liver cancer or cirrhosis in the family, get yourselves checked out. So these 4 points he wanted me to read out to, and that's the reason I said that this research is of great importance to India, because by driving our blood banks into making testing for hepatitis C virus compulsory, it has already saved millions of lives. And with the drug development that's taken place, and now the awareness that is now being pushed, of which I am becoming a part, it can save millions more lives. So let's not lose those. Now the important thing that I wanted to underline to you is that look at these 3 scientists who have shared this Nobel Prize for discovering hepatitis C. Look at their ages. The first, Professor Alter, is 85. The second, Professor Houghton, is 71. And the third, that is Professor Rice, is 68. So you can see how long it has taken for this science to progress, then to lead to something tangible like diagnosis, treatment, saving of lives, that the Nobel Prize has been awarded. So this is a journey from 1975-6, when they first noticed those hepatitis cases which were not hepatitis A or B, and they got curious about ye kya hai. From that until now, it's almost a generation's living period. Now, the second set of Nobel Prizes is for chemistry, and these two are wonderful women and young, 56 and 51. And these are only the 6th and 7th women in the history of Nobel Prizes to get Nobels for chemistry. Now, these are Emmanuelle Charpentier. I hope I pronounced that right in French. She is French. She is a professor at Max Planck Institute of Infectious Biology in Berlin. And second is Jennifer Doudna, who is also Li Ka-shing professor at University of Berkeley. Now these two worked, and these two discovered something called a CRISPR scissors. Now details of this are out of my league. So I leave them to my science editor, Sandhya Ramesh, who will explain these to you in her episode of Pure Science. So she'll go into more intricate details. I will tell you very simply what this is. Now, to call it scissors is like you say cyber knife for some advanced techniques or advanced sort of machinery to carry out radiation surgery. So it's not really a pair of scissors. But what's happened is that for the past many years, gene editing is a very hot scientific subject. It's a very hot scientific field, it's also a very hot scientific debate for ethical reasons, because there are questions about it, and some questions rose when, you might remember, this was the famous or infamous He Jiankui case. He Jiankui was a scientist in Shenzhen in China who began producing gene edited babies. So first he produced a pair of twin girls. They were given pseudonyms Lulu and Nana, and then one more child the next year, and then he was prosecuted and sent to jail for unethical use of science. So can you produce monsters? Can you produce Frankensteins? That was the fear then. But it's also a science that is very, very, very powerful. And what are the things this science has been known to do? In 2 patients, in fact 3 cancer patients, it has already been able to reprogram the immune system. Similarly, it's been able to eliminate HIV from human cells. It's been able to reverse congenital blindness in many cases, and then some other disease which may not be immediately life-threatening, but which take away the quality of life, like Lyme disease, which people get from bites of ticks that come in the forest area, essentially ticks carried by the deer of various species, and chronic pain as well. And then in agriculture, this has been of big help in improving crop yields, or also in producing seeds that are drought and disease resistant. So this is a big thing for humanity. Now the problem there is, there has been a big ethical debate about this. I was listening to the professor who headed the Nobel Committee giving these prizes, and he was asked to explain these, and he took about 10 minutes explaining this, and I will not go into details of that, but he said, look, this is of enormous importance. Then he was asked, why now? This has been going on for some time. So he said, look, with any research, you have to see when it's come of age, in the sense of when it can be applied, or when a turning point comes. In this case, the turning point is when you are trying to rewrite the DNA. You can't do it like tukka, isko thoda kaat ke dekh lete hain, isko thoda kaat ke dekh lete hain. All surgery has to be precise. In this case, it is surgery over something that, barring the very specialized equipment, nobody can see. So how do you make a little change there and make sure that, you know, some human being whose genetic material you are messing with doesn't grow horns tomorrow? So for that, you have to carry out very precise operations. So liken that to a pair of scissors. Now the pair of scissors you can use to cut this gene or genome or DNA wherever you want, but does the scissors know where to go? So they have designed, in this committee chairman's words, they have designed a scissor or pair of scissors which can be programmed to know where to cut. So this pair of scissors recognizes the place, the exact sequence which is problematic, which needs to be set right, and that's why it's a big breakthrough. And why did I say this is significant? For reasons other than the precise science of this, which I don't know that much about. It is because for the past many years, one of the greatest non-scientific anti-science campaigns in the world has been against genetically modified technology, gene editing, etc., etc. And there is a lot of fear mongering. So now that the Nobel Prize Committee has awarded this prize for this technology, it is a Nobel, Sweden, this is the home of the liberal left. Once they endorse this technology, it is actually a big shot in the arm for this modern technology. Now you might ask me, what is CRISPR technology? Listen to Sandhya Ramesh, I can't tell you, I can just expand it for you. It sounds like Greek to me. It is clustered, regularly interspaced, short, palindromic repeats. So figure it out: clustered, regularly interspaced, short, palindromic repeats.